total attack on one of the most fundamental principles of the Western world, which is your ability to express yourself and your ability to call out.
It was supposed to be a calm conversation about politics and free speech, but within minutes it turned into a public unraveling. Joe Rogan, with his calm stare and blunt honesty, started questioning why people in the UK are being arrested for what they post online. And Keir Starmer, the man known for keeping his cool, completely lost it. His voice cracked, his defences crumbled, and the polished politician suddenly looked like a man exposed. Rogan didn't even raise his voice, he just let the truth do the talking. And now everyone's asking the same thing. How did one podcast host manage to break Britain's most calculated leader on live air, the free speech flashpoint?
People have always been able to do that. These people are not calling for violence.
Yep.
They're being arrested for wild things. People are being arrested for liking posts.
Yep.
They're being some people were investigated for viewing.
The moment Joe Rogan brought up the UK's free speech problem, the temperature in the room shifted. He didn't shout, didn't rant. He just dropped the facts like a bomb. They arrested thousands of people for social media posts, he said, his tone half disbelief, half disgust. Across from him, Keir Starmer tried to keep his cool, but you could see it in his face, that flicker of discomfort. This wasn't some fringe internet rumour. According to reports like those highlighted by the New York Post, the UK has prosecuted thousands of people, around 12,000 annually by some counts, from what's face? Dolls! For what they post online. Not death threats, not hate campaigns, just offensive communications. And that's exactly what Rogan tore into. The insanity of punishing people for words, not actions. Starmer stumbled into the worst possible position for a politician in front of Rogan's massive audience, that defending the indefensible. He started mumbling about responsibility and social harmony, but Rogan wasn't buying it. Were they threatening people, sir? He asked. Starmer hesitated. They don't have to be, Rogan continued, the words slicing through the air. That's when it hit home. People weren't being punished for crimes, they were being punished for opinions. Rogan framed it perfectly. This wasn't law enforcement keeping the peace, this was the state deciding what speech was acceptable. And to him, that wasn't progress. That was tyranny with better branding. It wasn't just the numbers that shocked Rogan, it was the sheer absurdity of it all. Ordinary people, students, comedians, even retirees, have been dragged into courtrooms for tweets, memes, or Facebook comments deemed offensive. The laws behind it, like the UK's Communications Act and Public Order Act, were originally meant to stop harassment and hate crimes, but over time, they morphed into something darker, tools to police speech itself. Even Wikipedia's entry on UK censorship notes how vague legal terms like grossly offensive have led to chilling effects on online expression. It's one thing to punish someone for inciting violence, Rogan argued, but another entirely to jail someone for a joke.
Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the UK, is literally ruining the country, and the people seem to hate him as well. It's sad because the country used to be great. Such a shame.
Starmer tried to defend the British approach, talking about balance and protecting vulnerable groups, but Rogan wasn't having it. His response was the verbal equivalent of a knockout punch, calm, factual, and merciless. That's crazy, he said. They don't have to be threatening. They just said something the state didn't like. You could almost hear the collective gasp from viewers. To Rogan's audience, especially in America, where free speech is almost sacred, it sounded dystopian. Starmer's careful, legalistic answers only made him look more robotic, more detached from common sense. It was the kind of exchange that exposes just how wide the Atlantic really is when it comes to freedom. The scandal wasn't just that people were being arrested, it was that Britain's own leaders seemed okay with it. Rogan called it out for what it was, fear of dissent. He compared it to governments that claim to protect their citizens, but really just want to control them. The conversation spiraled into bigger questions about power, censorship, and hypocrisy. If people can be jailed for retweeting something controversial, how long before criticism itself becomes illegal? Rogan didn't have to raise his voice, the facts did all the shouting. By the end of the exchange, Starmer looked trapped between defending his country's laws and admitting they'd gone too far. Rogan, meanwhile, sat back with that trademark smirk, the look of a man who knows he's just exposed something rotten. The moment wasn't just about free speech anymore, it was about how fragile democracy looks when politicians confuse protection with control. In that instant, Rogan didn't just win the argument, he made Starmer the face of political overreach. And for millions watching, the message was clear. If speaking your mind gets you arrested, something's deeply broken in the so-called land of liberty. The clash.
I mean, this is an Orwell nightmare coming to life right in front of our face, and no one's flinching. No one in America is freaking out about what's happening in the UK at all.
From the first few seconds, you could tell Joe Rogan wasn't going to let Keir Starmer coast through this one. The Labour leader came in with that usual politician confidence, clean suit, tight smile, polished answers rehearsed to death. But Rogan, sitting across from him with his casual tone and piercing questions, didn't play by those rules. He started asking about arrests for online posts in the UK. And the tension in Starmer's shoulders said it all. Rogan's voice was calm, steady, but every word was like a jab. He wasn't asking to debate, he was asking to expose. When Rogan mentioned that thousands of people had been arrested in Britain for things they said online, Starmer tried to do damage control. He brushed it off as exaggeration, said those were fringe cases, maybe 30 or so prosecutions. But Rogan didn't flinch. Thousands, he repeated, pausing just long enough to let the disbelief sink in. He turned to his producer mid-show. "Jamie, fact-check that." And that's when things started to crumble. Because, of course, Rogan was right. The numbers didn't lie, and Starmer's attempt to downplay them made him look out of touch, even dishonest. The internet doesn't forget moments like that. The kind where the smartest guy in the room gets caught bluffing. Then came the real heat. Rogan started connecting the dots between free speech restrictions and government overreach. He pointed out how Western democracies were beginning to punish speech that wasn't even violent or hateful, just unpopular. "It's crazy," Rogan said, leaning forward. "They're not threatening anyone, they're just saying something the government doesn't like." That's when Starmer snapped. You could hear the frustration leak through his usually measured voice. He accused Rogan of oversimplifying complex legal matters. But it was too late. The tone gave him away. Rogan didn't need to raise his voice. Starmer's defensiveness did all the work.
We've had free speech for a very, very long time in the United Kingdom, and it will last for a very, very long time. Well, no, I mean, certainly we wouldn't want to reach across US citizens, and we don't, and that's absolutely right.
The exchange only got more uncomfortable. Rogan started listing real examples. Comedians charged for jokes, activists questioned for tweets, people fined for memes. Starmer's eyes darted. His answers grew longer and emptier. "We have a responsibility to ensure speech doesn't harm others," he insisted, sounding more like a lawyer than a leader. Rogan raised an eyebrow. "But who decides what harm means?" That line hit like a sledgehammer. You could feel the energy shift completely. Starmer had no comeback that didn't sound bureaucratic or cold. For the next few minutes, Rogan kept pressing, exposing the contradiction in Starmer's stance, a politician preaching freedom while defending censorship. Every time Starmer tried to reframe the issue, Rogan calmly brought him back to the uncomfortable truth. If someone can be jailed for a tweet, that's not protection, that's control. The audience, both in the studio and online, knew exactly who was winning. By the end of the segment, Starmer's calm composure had melted into visible irritation. He leaned forward, hands moving faster, voice tightening. Rogan just leaned back, almost amused, as if watching a man argue himself into a corner. When the conversation wrapped, Starmer forced a smile that fooled no one. Rogan thanked him politely, but his final line landed like a knockout punch. "Free speech isn't supposed to be safe, it's supposed to be free." That sentence echoed across social media within minutes, clipped, shared and replayed millions of times. Starmer walked out of that studio looking like a man who just realized the internet was about to have a field day at his expense. And it did. By the next morning, headlines were everywhere. Joe Rogan destroys Keir Starmer on free speech. It wasn't just an interview anymore, it was a cultural moment. A clash between polished politics and raw truth. And truth, as always, stole the show. The meltdown.
Well, no, I mean, certainly we wouldn't want to reach across US citizens, and we don't, and that's absolutely right. But in relation to free speech in the UK, I'm very proud of our history there.
It started with a tiny crack, a sigh, a twitch, a flash of irritation. in Keir Starmer's eyes. But within minutes, that crack split wide open for millions to see. Joe Rogan had backed him into a corner, calmly peeling away his carefully rehearsed lines about balanced responsibility and appropriate limitations. You could almost feel Starmer's patience disintegrate in real time. The man who built his brand on restraint suddenly looked like someone trying to keep from snapping. The more Rogan stayed composed, the more Starmer spiraled. His voice rose, his answers turned sharp, and that famous lawyer's cool vanished like steam under pressure.
That actually affect not just the British, of course, what the British do in their own country is up to them, but also affect American technology companies and by extension American citizens. So that is something that we'll talk about today at lunch.
The breaking point came when Rogan brought up a chilling fact that people in the UK were being jailed simply for retweeting or sharing opinions the government found offensive. Starmer tried to spin it, talking about context and preventing harm, but Rogan wasn't letting go. "You're punishing people for words," he said, his tone steady, his eyes locked. "That's not democracy, that's control." And that was it. Starmer's face flushed. He leaned forward and snapped, "It's easy for you to talk about freedom from a studio in Texas. You don't have to manage real consequences." The air froze. Rogan didn't even blink. He just smiled slightly and said, "I think managing people's thoughts is a bigger consequence." The crowd erupted. That single exchange was enough to shatter Starmer's entire performance. His composure was gone, replaced by visible frustration. He started talking over Rogan, his words tumbling into each other as he tried to regain control of the narrative. But Rogan just waited, silent, letting Starmer's panic echo. Every time Starmer raised his voice, it only highlighted how calm Rogan remained. It was a masterclass in contrast. One man unraveling, the other dissecting him with silence. For a politician who thrives on structure and control, the chaos of a real-time Rogan grilling was a nightmare come true. Viewers saw it instantly. The trembling hands, the tight jaw, the clipped words. Rogan didn't destroy Starmer with insults or theatrics. He did it by letting him implode. The more Starmer defended censorship, the more he looked like the villain in his own story. When Rogan asked if he believed speech should ever be punished for being offensive, Starmer's response was a messy contradiction of, "Not usually. In context, and it depends." Rogan laughed, not cruelly, but knowingly, and that laugh said everything. The audience could sense it. The mighty had cracked. By the end, Starmer wasn't debating anymore. He was pleading. "You don't understand the British context," he said, voice tense, eyes darting. But Rogan, relaxed as ever, replied, "Freedom doesn't need context, it needs courage." That line landed like a hammer. Starmer froze for a split second, then gave a forced smile that looked more like defeat than diplomacy. When the cameras cut, the damage was irreversible. Within hours, clips of the meltdown were everywhere. Millions of views, endless memes, and headlines crowning it the most humiliating interview of Starmer's career. Commentators called it a public undressing, while Rogan fans hailed it as the moment the mask slipped. And honestly, that's what it felt like. The moment when Britain's most careful politician lost his cool on the world's biggest podcast, exposing the truth behind all that composure. A man terrified of being challenged. The fallout.
For free speech today.
Well, free speech is very important. I don't know if you're referring to any place in particular. Perhaps they are, but
We've had free speech for a very, very long time here, so we're very proud of that.
By the next morning, the internet was on fire. Clips of Joe Rogan calmly dismantling Keir Starmer were everywhere. TikTok, YouTube, Twitter, even the late-night comedy shows. Hashtags like #StarmerMeltdown, #RoganDestroys, Starmer, and #FreeSpeechShowdown were trending across the globe. The British tabloids called it a verbal car crash, while American outlets painted it as a lesson in political fragility. Starmer, the man known for his steady composure, had become the meme of the week, the politician who lost it on Rogan. The damage wasn't just bad press, it was humiliation on a global stage. Inside Labour headquarters, panic set in. Advisors scrambled to spin the disaster, claiming the clip was taken out of context. But you can't take tone out of context, and Starmer's tone was unmistakable. Defensive, frustrated, and flustered. Anonymous insiders described the mood as funeral-like. One aide reportedly said he went on Rogan to look relatable and came out looking rattled. They had spent years building an image of control, only for it to collapse in under 10 minutes of unscripted conversation. Meanwhile, the Tories didn't waste a second. One MP joked online, "If Rogan can knock him over with words, imagine what Putin would do." Brutal, but it stuck. Joe Rogan, on the other hand, didn't even need to gloat. His fans did it for him. Every podcast clip, every highlight reel, every quote about freedom over censorship turned into pure internet gold. Even people who weren't fans of Rogan started admitting it. The guy had a point. He exposed how fragile and performative modern politics can be. Without yelling, without insults, he made one of the UK's most powerful men come undone on camera. Rogan's casual approach, his refusal to back down, and his genuine disbelief at Britain's speech laws hit harder than any planned takedown ever could.
Across the UK to take part in a new investigations unit which aims to maximise social media intelligence as the government aims to avoid riots. But of course, many are concerned about this and how this could lead to restrictions of free speech, James.
Meanwhile, the British public started asking uncomfortable questions. Was Starmer's meltdown just a bad moment or a sign of something deeper? Did his obsession with safe politics make him too cautious to lead? Opinion polls didn't immediately shift, but his approval rating online took a beating. Every major news outlet replayed the clip with gleeful analysis, and it became the go-to example of why politicians struggle in the age of unfiltered media. You can survive a scandal in politics, but losing your cool, especially to Joe Rogan, is the kind of moment that lingers forever. Starmer tried to recover by doubling down on his message about responsibility in speech. But it only made things worse. It came off as defensive. The sound of a man who still didn't get why people were laughing. Rogan, meanwhile, moved on to his next episode, barely mentioning the chaos he'd caused. That was the real sting. Starmer's career took a bruising, and Rogan didn't even have to break a sweat. In the end, the fallout wasn't just about who won the argument. It was about what the world saw. Rogan represented raw authenticity and intellectual confidence. Starmer represented the carefully scripted world of politics, and that world cracked under pressure. The podcast might have lasted an hour, but the echo of that clash will live much longer. For Starmer, it wasn't just a bad day. It was the day his carefully built image got shredded by the one thing no politician can control: the truth told too plainly on the world's biggest microphone. The aftermath.
Britain has a long history of free speech, and yes, that's entirely true, but it can go in the blink of an eye, and that is what appears to be happening at the moment. It is not an effective use of police resources.
In the days that followed, it felt like the internet had turned Keir Starmer's meltdown into a cultural event. Every platform was buzzing with reactions, some mocking, some stunned, and some genuinely disturbed by what the exchange revealed. News outlets from London to Los Angeles replayed the clip like it was breaking news, dissecting every raised eyebrow and clipped tone. Starmer's defenders insisted he'd been ambushed by Rogan's style of conversation, while critics said he'd finally been exposed. A politician so obsessed with control that he couldn't handle a real, unscripted conversation. The damage wasn't just viral, it was personal. Rogan's audience, millions of loyal listeners who pride themselves on calling out political nonsense, pounced on every contradiction Starmer uttered. The clip of him saying, "It's easy for you to talk about freedom from a studio in Texas," became the quote that defined the disaster. It sounded defensive, elitist, and out of touch. Rogan's comeback, "Freedom doesn't need context, it needs courage," was and instantly clipped into memes, remixes, and fan edits that flooded timelines. It was devastatingly cinematic, the calm podcaster versus the cornered politician. And no matter how many times Starmer's team tried to explain or clarify, nothing could erase that moment of raw humiliation. Inside Westminster, the fallout was even uglier. Members of Starmer's own party started grumbling that he'd embarrassed Labour internationally. One senior MP reportedly quipped, "He went on Rogan looking like a statesman and left looking like a substitute teacher who lost the classroom." Even supporters admitted it was bad optics. His composure, his trademark strength, had become his weakness. The man who prided himself on keeping calm had finally cracked, and he'd done it in front of the world's most popular podcast host. Every newsroom in Britain ran with the same headline: "Starmer loses his cool on Rogan." It wasn't just politics anymore, it was pop culture. Rogan, meanwhile, didn't need to do anything. His silence was louder than any statement. The episode's views skyrocketed. His clips hit record engagement, and his audience grew even larger. He didn't have to brag. His fans did it for him. Commentators called it a modern media knockout, pointing out how Rogan's calm, grounded delivery made Starmer look like a man drowning in his own script. And the truth is, that was the real power shift. The podcast host didn't just win a debate, he redefined it. For Starmer, the aftermath became a long week of damage control. Public relations teams pushed interviews, photo ops, and sound bites about moving forward. But the more he tried to steer the conversation away, the more people brought it back. He had become a symbol, not just of political caution, but of what happens when a leader faces an audience that doesn't play by old media rules. On Rogan's turf, there's no teleprompter, no spin doctor, no safety net. Just you, your words, and the truth you either stand by or crumble under. By the time the story finally began to fade, one thing was crystal clear. Joe Rogan hadn't just defeated Keir Starmer in an argument. He had punctured the illusion of control that politicians cling to in every carefully managed interview. The episode wasn't just a clash of personalities, it was a cultural reset. The day authenticity beat authority. And whether you loved or hated Rogan, you had to admit it. No one had ever seen Keir Starmer so completely undone. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.